Formula 1 may be in the middle of its summer shutdown, but the FIA has been busy signing off a raft of regulations that will have a big impact in the short, medium and long term. These include tweaking the changes being implemented next year to reduce bouncing and porpoising, and signing off the 2026 power unit regulations, a move that should herald the arrival of Porsche and Audi. But perhaps the most eye-catching changes are to the roll hoop regulations for 2023, following Zhou Guanyu's terrifying accident at the start of the British Grand Prix. Anyone who witnessed that accident and saw the alarming photos of the Alfa Romeo with its roll structure missing will realise how important these changes are. So let's take an in-depth look at the changes that have been approved by the FIA World Motorsport Council and explain what they mean for the cars and drivers. It's no great surprise given the evidence that was in plain sight on the day, but following its detailed analysis of Zhou's Silverstone crash, the FIA confirmed the roll hoop of the Alfa Romeo did fail. That made action to improve roll hoop safety inevitable. Zhou's car was launched into the air when it was hit by George Russell's Mercedes, which had been pitched left when Russell turned across the fast-starting Pierre Gasly. The Alfa Romeo landed upside down on the track and slid towards turn 1 and into the gravel trap. After digging into the gravel and being pitched into a spectacular roll, Zhou's car cleared the tyre wall and came to rest between the barrier and the safety fence. Remarkably, Zhou was uninjured and he credited the halo, which remained intact, for saving his life. The FIA cited 3 key findings from its investigation. It noted that the pointed top of the roll hoop dug into the track surface and caused the failure, that the wording of the regulations allows the roll hoops to be homologated with the test force acting through a lower point than intended, and that there is a need for a significant increase in roll hoop strength. As a result, several changes have been made to the roll structure and associated rules for next year. The roll hoop now requires what the FIA calls a rounded top. This is to reduce the chance of it digging into the ground as it did at Silverstone. The exact wording of the new roll hoop regulations and the geometries that will be allowed have not yet been revealed, with the first issue of the 2023 technical regulations published this week featuring the same wording as the 22 rules. These will be updated in a future issue of the technical regulations. The changes are likely to mean the single spike roll hoop concept used by Alfa Romeo is likely to be banned, or at the very least heavily modified to achieve the required rounded shape. The other 9 teams all run the more rounded design already rather than the single spike, although both concepts must pass the same load tests, but others may well have to modify their roll structures too. To tackle the problem of the homologation load test potentially being applied too low, a minimum height for this to be applied will be brought in. The FIA will also introduce a new load test that will apply a forward force to the roll hoop. There is also the intention for a significant overhaul of the roll hoop tests in 2024 to make sure that cars can resist more severe loads. All of this is good news for drivers' heads, given how serious the consequences of such a failure could have been for Zhou. The FIA has also pushed through the suite of 4 technical regulations changes designed to limit porpoising and bouncing for next year. These changes have been pushed through for safety reasons, following driver complaints about the beating their backs and necks and possibly even their brains were taking from the savage movements of the cars. FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem has been particularly engaged on this topic and has spoken with the drivers personally to canvass opinion. The FIA announced the intended changes after a meeting of the Technical Advisory Committee in mid-July. 3 of the 4 measures have gone through as intended: the raising of the underfloor diffuser throat, bringing in more stringent lateral floor deflection tests, and introducing a more accurate sensor to help quantify aerodynamic oscillations and to police them more effectively. But the most contentious change was the intention to raise the floor edges by 25mm. This divided the teams, with as many as 6 of them, led by Red Bull and Ferrari, against the moves, and Mercedes, McLaren and others keen for it to go through. The Mercedes position was that this is an issue of driver safety and not about lobbying for favourable technical regulations. Although Mercedes boss Toto Wolff has admitted the problem of his cars bouncing up and down has eased lately, which he partly attributes to track characteristics, he also stresses the fact that a majority of drivers, privately at least, support the changes because of health concerns. Of course, rivals suggest that Wolff's real agenda is that he wants the changes to help Mercedes. Regular antagonist Red Bull team principal Christian Horner has suggested that is the case, but he also warned these rule changes could have unintended consequences and lead to teams chasing wacky aeroelastic concepts. Of course, some of Red Bull's rivals might suggest it has been doing exactly that already. But to be fair, Horner did use the word compromise, and a compromise is what has been achieved. Instead of the floor edges being raised by 25mm, they will now be raised by just 15. That's probably not the compromise Horner had in mind, but it's also not what Wolff wanted. So if the definition of compromise is that neither side is entirely happy, that seems about right. Realistically, the teams will have known what was likely coming for a couple of weeks now, but these late changes will have an impact on 2023 design work. This will also have cost implications. As McLaren technical director James Key said in Hungary, these changes have come about as late as the teams could accept them. But with the changes now signed off by the FIA World Motorsport Council and locked into the regulations, the teams now know for certain what they are dealing with. And that means Wolff, Horner and the rest of the F1 paddock will have to find something else to argue about. We're sure it won't take long. Formula One's new engine regulations for 2026 have been in the works for years, but at last, well after their original intended deadline, they have now been finalised. That means Porsche, which is well advanced in the process of buying into the Red Bull F1 operation and will develop a new engine in partnership with Red Bull's new powertrains division, can finally greenlight its F1 entry. It's even registered a corny trademark that we can expect to see at the centre of its campaign once it makes the news official. And Audi, which could buy a majority stake in Sauber, probably won't be far behind. The FIA says new sporting, technical and financial regulations have been approved for 2026 following 4 key pillars related to F1's overall strategy. These are maintaining the spectacle, environmental sustainability, financial sustainability and being attractive to new power unit manufacturers. The last objective has been achieved given the likely arrival of Porsche and Audi. As for maintaining the spectacle, the power units are conceived to deliver similar performance to the current engines without the pace gaps between manufacturers getting too big. To meet the environmental target, the engines will be powered by a fully sustainable fuel. That is defined as no new fossil carbon will enter the atmosphere from a Formula One car exhaust. That strange phrasing is to allow for the sustainable synthetic fuels that still smash hydrocarbons but that are made using technology such as carbon capture that takes carbon out of the atmosphere. The fuel flow rate to the internal combustion engine will be limited by energy rather than mass or volume of fuel, and the development of the bottom half of the engine, that's the engine block, crankshaft, connecting rods, pumps and ancillaries, will be limited. Manufacturers will also have more freedom to develop the top end of the engine, with the aim of optimizing the combustion system around the new fuels. As expected, the MGU-H will disappear, and there will be a general drive towards limiting the use of costly exotic materials within the engine designs to reduce expenditure. This was an important concession that needed to be made to get new manufacturers in. The other key concession is contained within the financial measures, with new manufacturers getting spending breaks in the new power unit cost cap. This is set at $95 million for the 2023-25 seasons, which are using the current power units, then $130 million from the start of the new engine rules in 2026. But new manufacturers are allowed an extra $10 million for their first 2 seasons and $5 million in the third. The dimensions of the engine internals, such as pistons, will now be more tightly defined than before, and ancillaries such as exhausts, which are frequently replaced on current engines, will need to last the full life of each engine. The MGU-H's loss is being replaced by increased power from the NGU-K to up the electrical power to 350 kilowatts, that's around 469 brake horsepower. All of this adds up to the biggest changes in F1's engine since the start of the V6 turbo hybrid era in 2014. So with the wrangling behind the scenes finally done, now the serious work begins, with F1's engine manufacturers, that's Mercedes, Ferrari, Renault and probable newcomers Porsche, which is actually Red Bull, and Audi, now having 3.5 years to produce the best possible power unit for 2026.